the most important element is that we need to address the adaptation and mitigation elements together. Very often we separate them. There's no sustainable solution if we don't address both of them at the same time. And water is essential in enabling that. In adapting to climate change, if we have healthy water resources, we have healthy ecosystems. And like we all know, we need our oceans and our forests and landscapes to produce oxygen, but also to absorb CO2, for example. So it's not about putting things against one another, it's having this integrated and holistic approach to addressing climate change, for example. And water is a formidable solution for that. A lot of the countries that have signed up to the Paris Agreement published their nationally determined contributions. And we often say that water is not mentioned in the Paris Agreement, but it's very high, and there's a big priority for the countries that put them in the nationally determined contribution. So countries are willing and engaged to focus on water issues. We just need to make sure that it's really addressed for adaptation and mitigation in an integrated manner. I think what's interesting when we look at water crises today is that they're not linked to a developing country or to a developed country. We often talk about too much, too little, or too dirty water, and that exists in all countries. I mean, Stockholm is in Sweden, people think of it as a water country, but we've had crises there with droughts, forest fires, but also with AMR, which are pharmaceutical pollutions in the water resources or in the Black Sea, for example. So water crises are everywhere. Yes, it's one of the biggest causes for deaths still, unfortunately, in developing countries. But in developed countries, we have a big issue when it comes to the water quality. And as we know, we have the same water on Earth than when the Earth was created. We cannot create new water. So the more we pollute it, the more we have pollutions that are not treatable, the more we're actually going to a huge water crisis where we will be quite stuck, actually. So it's very important that this whole circular economy process actually avoids of rejecting pollutions that we cannot treat in the water resources, and especially in our ecosystems, because healthy ecosystems need clean water, and that's the only way to ensure a sustainable future. Well, I think the whole issue with the youth is really a paradigm shift that majority of population in countries are youth. Rwanda's 60% of their population is under 25. So they're not victims, they're not youth to be seen on the side, they're active, they're engaged, and they're working. So they need to be at the table just like any other stakeholder. They're not the vulnerable group as we should be seeing them. They're very active. We've seen all of the different marches, the school strikes. Again, Greta Thunberg has been leading that. And I think they're aware. They either are in a climate anxiety process of where they are afraid of what's going to happen because the climate change impacts is exponential. We have no idea what's going to happen. Glaciers are melting, sea level is rising. But what does that mean actually on one location? We have a hard time knowing at the moment. But the youth can be in that anxiety, but they're also very much in action, and they want mobilization now from everybody. So they're a very strong agent of change and catalyzer, and they're already active. They're working people. So I think we need to stop considering them as vulnerable groups on the side and actually take them in as being one of those strong agents of change. They're innovating. They're the ones using a lot of the new technologies. So it's really about embracing them in the discourse and not just inviting them because we want a youth representative. In the water community, we're very proud and very happy to have Hungary as a water champion. It has shown leadership, like other countries also, in keeping water high up on the political agenda. At that moment in 2013, we were discussing and debating a lot what the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals would be, and it wasn't a given that water would be there. And what was very powerful with the Budapest Water Summit, it was able to bring Ban Ki-moon, who was the UN Secretary General at that moment, all of the leading UN agencies, and highlighted how not only water was essential and needed its own SDG, but also how water was essential for the whole 2030 agenda. And therefore, we have water-related targets in all of the 2030 agenda. So actually, water is an enabler to implementing the 2030 agenda. If we don't address the water issues, we will not be successful in the goals that we have identified there. So that was, for me, one of the most important takeaways and essential ones of the Budapest Water Summit, the first edition. I think this whole approach of having a more integrated and intersectoral approach to water is something that's also your president has been pushing quite a lot, and he's been a champion in that, not having a siloed approach to water resource management and showing how it's essential for industries, for production, for domestic use, for urban resilience. So now that we have these 4 global frameworks, which are the 2030 Agenda, the Paris Climate Agreement, the Sunlight Disaster Risk Reduction, and the UN Habitat 3, I really hope that we will continue embracing and pushing for the implementation of these agendas to be done in an integrated manner.